that kind of like ability to distill thinking, I think is really impressive, and I want to learn a little bit about that.
When people tell me I can't do something, it gets me pretty fired up.
Your rebellious path was to go to an Ivy League school. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to stop you right now. What? And you learned this in 2020?
Yeah.
I knew you in 2020.
Yeah.
I would be two different people. You defined yourself as somebody who kind of has a boulder on your shoulder, and when you're told you can't do something, you do it.
Around the company, we call it achieving the impossible, right? When you're told you can't do something, you double down on trying to do it.
Duncan Gillis, thank you for sitting down with me today. Appreciate you having me here at your hangar here in Lower Alabama.
Well, Behzad, I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
We've talked about doing this for a while, and I'm delighted you came down. I apologize it took me so long to kind of get organized, but I wanted to get through our TerraPower announcement before we sat down to talk as well.
Yeah, that was a big announcement, and we'll definitely talk about that today.
Yeah.
But just sitting around in this room, we have known each other, and we've shared stories about our interest in flying. You're a little bit further along that journey than I am, and other experiences in our lives and careers. But I do want to learn a little bit more about you here today, and I can pick up just a few insights about you just by sitting around in this room. Behind you is a Ranger flag. There's a plane off over my left shoulder here, and you just announced the rebranding of your organization to TerraPower, and obviously there's something behind that name, and so I want to learn that today. But maybe for us to start with, how we got to this room and how I'm having this conversation with you, and all of the attributes of where you are in life today.
Yeah.
I'd love to learn more about how you got here, and take me back as far as you want to go. Starting with your childhood. You're not from Alabama, right?
Let me start out, first of all, by saying, why we're here, right? It's because, as you know, I sit on the board of the Auto Care Association, and I've had a great opportunity to get to know all the staff of Auto Care and to watch you personally. You're very analytical, but you're also incredibly creative and innovative. And I saw what you're trying to do with this thing, and I said, man, this is a guy who's not just out there, providing data to everybody, but he's trying to think of new ways to do things differently. And I respect that, and that's sort of an attribute I look for. So that's why I'm doing it.
I appreciate that compliment.
Yeah.
I'm just going to correct the record here, because there are going to be people that view this that think that that's a true story. But the true story is that our head of comms, Stacy Miller, encouraged us to hire Jackie Lutz, and they came on and presented this idea of a podcast, and as part of a broader digital strategy. Mm-hmm. And took a little bit of convincing, and I said, great. They put a really solid plan together. They presented it. Then they put out the podcast kind of strategy and the storyboard and everything, and we have these Auto Care on Air, and we have 4 shows, and they told me about the 3 shows, and the 4th show they said, you're doing it. And I said, no. And they said, yes.
You said, no, I'm a data guy.
Well, I just, it's a very public and live format, right? And so me, I can come up with questions all day long and think things through. I don't know if that's exactly like a media personality, right? But they said, listen, your unique way of asking questions, studying people, and coming to, insights that other people can digest and walk away with is what we're looking for. So I appreciate the compliment, but really it's I learned you don't say no to Jackie and Stacy, and
I got it. Stacy and Jackie are the innovators.
Yeah.
And they delegated up on
That's
the execution. Right. Great work.
Yeah. Yeah. So
there's a lot of great ideas that come from within the organization,
for
right?
Sure,
and
sure.
As a leader, you got to be able to sort of check your ego and identify them, and then decide what you want to back. So hats off to you for backing this one.
Well, you have I've spoken on top of the things around us that give me visual cues about you. I've actually spoken with people about you.
Uh-huh.
These are people that I've known in your organization, but I also contacted some other people. And just to somewhat, use the time to return the compliment, but these are more just things that you exhibit on a daily basis, and I've discovered are that
I feel like I'm going to get a performance review. Go ahead.
It's somewhat of a performance review, and so I won't tell you who these come from. Let's call it one of those anonymous 360s. Right. The first is that you inspire people, and you maybe it's not the most comfortable in the moment, and I'm very familiar with that. That feedback, but you really kind of activate people and get the best out of them. And that's through inspiration. And ultimately, I think people feel rewarded and excited about that, kind of actualizing themselves. So I want to learn about that. You've been described as the smartest person in the room.
I don't know about that. But
I've heard, when Duncan talks, people listen. But my own observation, and this is something that came from somebody else as well, is that you'll sit in a room, and it could be a board meeting, and you'll listen to the whole conversation, you'll listen to the debate, and you're paying intense attention, but eventually, sides coalesce and voices get louder, and one side argues A and the other side argues B. And at some point, the room will quiet down, and you'll interject with a comment, and you'll just say, this conversation comes down to A or B. And the room stops and kind of realizes that there's kind of like a fundamental root cause point that needs to be solved first, and then that gives you the answer. And so that kind of like ability to distill thinking, I think is really impressive, and I want to learn a little bit about that and see where that comes from and if that's a practice skill. But I also know that there's usually only just one right answer there, and sometimes the second answer is a trap, and it's for the audience to figure out what the trap is. Is that a fair characterization?
I wouldn't call it a trap.
Sure.
I would say it's an exercise in rational thinking and bringing facts together to understand what the right direction is. And a lot of times there are multiple options, but it's trying to get people to decide upon the best option. And there may not be a single right answer. I just had a call this morning. I spent the last few days with peer CEOs in industrial companies, talking to a variety of people. And I called my COO this morning and I said, I've been talking to people about all these tariffs, and, they're thinking about A, and you and I are thinking about option B, and we're the only ones. So either we're really, really smart, or we're big outliers and we're making a huge mistake. What do you think? I said, I'm looking for a little bit of affirmation from you around, are we going in the right direction? And he walked me through his logic on why what we were doing was exactly right. There were fallback options to what the rest of them were doing, but we should try what we're doing first in terms of how we approach the tariffs. And it's that kind of thinking that really helps our company, sort of do better.
But that guidance, even through that exercise where you don't know the answer and you're trying to figure out what's going on with something like tariffs. We're sitting here in March of 2025, and obviously there's a lot of volatility around tariffs. Every day the rules change, but
it's a new crisis. Got to have a crisis.
But people view it as a crisis, and in every other conversation I have, there's just the discussion of the ambiguity. What if this? What if this? What do you think is going to happen here? What do you think is going to happen there? That question of what do you think they think? I never understand when people ask that question, because you can't put yourself in somebody's head. And I always try to think about ways to react to the situation within your abilities. But even when I do that, it's still, there may be like 6 or 7 options. I'm guilty of overthinking often, but in your guidance to your business partner, you gave them 2 options. You did it's A or B.
It's the same thing. Yeah, exactly. That's why I thought it was kind of funny, but it wasn't a trap.
No,
it was
true.
More just, let's think this through together. And are we headed in the right direction? And I'm the one, I think we both really want to go in the direction we're going, but it's always a good check to, look outside and see what the rest of the world is doing, even outside the industry.
If I just like to push on it a little bit.
Yeah.
You create an A-B situation. You even say, listen, we're in the A camp. There are only 2 of us out of 10, right?
Yeah. These are very successful companies, very successful CEOs.
Agreed,
right?
but
I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. But
outside the industry, obviously, I can't talk about it in the industry, competitors.
But again, you're the premise of this question is that you're kind of in rooms where there are successful CEOs, and I kind of characterize the opinion of you in that light. You have a firm belief around A. Are you asking somebody in that moment to prove you wrong by making a strong case for B that you're not seeing, or are you trying to get them to A?
In the example I just went through from this morning, it was more just, let's think about this together. Private discussion, just the 2 of us. If I'm in a room and there's some convincing that needs to happen to get everybody on the same page, it might be a different approach.
I got it. So in that moment, you're totally open to being wrong with your approach.
Yeah. I mean, this is my chief operating officer, John Amio, right? He's my partner in this stuff. Yeah.
Got it. So can we just step back, because I
didn't answer your question.
I understand that, and I want to ask it again, because it's so hard for me as a person to take everything you're saying without knowing just basically everything about you. Yeah.
So I'm not from Alabama.
Okay.
You can tell by my accent. So I grew up in a small town in New England, very small town. It was called the Irish Riviera, a town called Scituate. Scituate. Not too many people can spell it. And it wasn't a nice way to describe the town, right? It was the way it was described by some of the old-time Bostonians, because, in the old days, the Irish were the immigrants coming in. We talk about, other ethnicities who are coming into the country now. In those days, the Irish were the ones coming in. And so they put them all down in this little town and called it the Irish Riviera, and that's where they all congregated. But it was a nice town. My mother was a secretary. She was with the school system, and then at the little town hall there. Then never went to university. She started out as secretary at a company called Polaroid, which was a startup in those days. When she was there, she was a secretary to the CEO and to the chief technology officer. And she had fond memories of that, but she ended up, leaving when she became pregnant with me. My father was a salesman. He sold heating equipment. Didn't really work very hard, but was always at all my different athletic events and pretty supportive of that, and sort of reliving his youth through all the stuff I was doing as well. But he was pretty tough on me as well, right? He was very demanding and critical at times as well. My mother was more intellectually encouraging, I would say. So I grew up in this little town. Didn't have any money. We were sort of on the other side of the tracks. And wanted to go to university. Was doing pretty well academically. Got a scholarship to a local private high school because of academics and athletics. Wanted to go to university, and my parents said, "Well, there's no money, so you need to get an appointment to a military academy or go to local community college, right? Get a technical degree or something." And I said, which is code for working on a CNC machine, right? Which would have been fine. And I said, okay. So I applied, as I said earlier, and wanted to fly, and that didn't work out. And then I applied for a scholarship with the Army. And at the time, the Reagan buildup was going on relative to the Soviet Union that we were talking about earlier. This was the Cold War. And so they were investing in young officers. And so you could, it was pretty hard, but you could get a scholarship, a 4-year scholarship, which included a stipend of $100 a month, and it paid for your books as well and all your tuition. And in exchange for that, you committed to 4 years of active duty service and then 2 years in the reserves. And so I applied for that and ended up getting that in October of my junior year of high school. So then I went on to start applying to programs or schools that had the ROTC program and that used that scholarship. I grew up in New England, so, if you really wanted to do anything in life, you had to get into an Ivy League school. That's changed a lot. And I've learned a lot about that as I've lived in other parts of the country. But you're sort of brainwashed in New England in that direction. And so I applied to a bunch of Ivy League schools and got into a couple of them, ended up going to Cornell and did all the Army stuff. And then studied business there. And then I guess my junior year, I had to make a decision. Do I want to keep the scholarship and continue on, or do I want to give up the scholarship and just, live a civilian life? The reality is there wasn't an option for me. So, I said, I'm in. They sent me down to Fort Bragg over the summer, and I did some training there, and then to Fort Benning, and went to airborne school and jumped out of airplanes and started really getting into it. And then the people who were running the program said to me, we really think you could have a great career in the military, and you should approach it like a career. And therefore, you got to go in the infantry, right? Which is the sharp end. Those are the guys who do the fighting. The mission is to take territory, destroy the enemy, and take territory. And that's what the infantry does. And so I said, okay, I'm in. And that was sort of the beginning of my life and how things worked out. I met my wife in college, proposed to her on the day we graduated, and I got commissioned since I had a job. Did it in front of 200 people on one knee. She said yes.
Oh,
it was pretty funny. Yeah, I was a little concerned.
Yeah.
And then we went off and had our life.
Was your father in the military?
He was. Yeah, he got drafted. He was enlisted. I think he got out as a corporal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a history of service. I had an uncle who was a ranger in World War II, which is when it was all formed. He was in the 6th Battalion and was 19 years old and was killed in Italy after the invasion of Sicily. And then I had another uncle who was Green Beret Special Operations. He fought in the Korean War and the Vietnam War.
Do these inspire you to go into the military too, or was it more just like, I want to go the Ivy League route, but I also, can do the military because I have family that's done this?
So there was an element of service, and there was a bigger element of economics, right? When people tell me I can't do something, it gets me pretty fired up, right? And so my parents telling me, hey, you're not going to be able to go to school. I want to demonstrate I could figure it out, and I did it.
Why? Like what? Why did you, neither one of your parents went to college, yeah, right? And so, but your rebellious path was to go to an Ivy League school? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, it was just, at the time, it was just inside of me. Something that I just had this, driving ambition. A little bit of a, some people have a chip on their shoulder. I probably had a boulder on my shoulder, right? Saying that, tell me what I can't do and I'll prove you wrong.
Did you have any siblings?
I had one brother.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Did you guys get along, or was that kind of like, you just constantly pushed each other to be better and prove each other wrong?
So we're very, very different, very, very different people. Look different ambition, different intellect, different socially, different everything. And growing up, just sort of that's just how I thought people were. And then this is a longer story, but in 2017, my mother passed away.
I'm sorry.
And that's okay. And when she passed away, we learned that she had been protecting my father, who had dementia, and he had pretty severe dementia. So she passes away. My brother says, okay, I'll keep an eye on him. They're all up in New England. And he does it for a couple of months, and then he just gets fed up and walks out one day.
It's really difficult.
And I'm the guy responsible for, legally responsible. And so, they find him wandering around because he's still living at home. And I said, okay, this isn't going to work. So we have to figure out a different solution. And we end up putting him in a memory care facility up there. And then then the pandemic hits. And I said, well, this doesn't work. I can't get up there. No one's going to see him. He's just there. So we bring him down here to Alabama. And he passed away sort of in the depths of the pandemic, like May 2020, a week after my first grandson was born.
Oh my God, I'm so
sorry. Think about that emotional roller coaster, right? Your first grandson's born during the pandemic. You're trying to go see him, right? And then you're rushing back where it's hard to travel to go say goodbye to your father. So that was pretty amazing. So we couldn't bury him because it was a pandemic, and he's down here, and he wanted to be buried with my mother up in New England. So had him cremated. And then in July, we went and had our little family thing and put the ashes in with her. We're coming back from that, and I said, and it just kind of hit me. I don't know what drove it. It just kind of hit me. I said, I'm not sure he was really my father. Uh-huh. And my oldest son says to me, I know, it's kind of weird, right? It's just, sometimes this is just how my brain works sometimes. Things just pop into my mind. It just popped into because, we look different. My brother's different. I'm different than all my cousins on that side of the family.
This is in 2020, though.
This is in 2020.
This is not
after he passed away.
Like you have a whole life to figure
that out.
Had
a whole life in between there, right? Just never occurred to me. And it pops in, and my oldest son says, who's a computer science guy, big tech guy, he laughed and he goes, well, just take a DNA test. So they're all up there in New England. I come back here to go to work, and I said, maybe I'll do that. So I took 2 tests. I took one with 23andMe and one with Ancestry, and they both came back and said, your ancestry was not what I thought it was.
Did your brother do one?
And then I had my brother do it, and it turns out he was my half brother. I had my sons do it. They're both my sons, so that was good.
Okay.
But it turns out that my mother had an affair with another man, and I was the outcome of that. And so you think about it from my father's standpoint, right? He had to raise me knowing that, and so that created some of the tension that we had growing up. And then it also, for me, it says, okay, so who's the guy?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to stop you right now. What?
Yeah.
So you didn't find this out from your mom or your dad. This was never addressed.
No, they held this secret. That generation didn't talk about this stuff, right?
They held this their whole life.
This is sort of, I found out afterwards the fact, this is documented, right? It's called NEP, Not Expected Parent, that came out once these DNA tests became more mainstream.
Wow. So you're like,
there's a community of people.
There's a community. Yeah. Since these DNA tests come out, like you're not alone in this.
No.
Are there like online forums about like, wow, I just learned I'm not from my 2 parents?
I don't do a lot of online forums. I just looked it up and learned the term.
I can't. I'm sorry.
That.
So,
I wasn't looking for support. I was just trying to figure out, wow, this is interesting.
Okay.
A little shocking.
So your mom you said she was at Polaroid at the time.
Yeah.
In Boston. Were your parents married at the time?
Yeah. Yeah. They got married in 1956 and I was born in 1963. 19, that is.
Does your brother now know that
he's my half brother? Yeah, we laugh about it. Yeah, we laugh about it. I mean, it's all, we were the outcome, right? It's all history.
How did your wife react to finding out?
She laughed too.
Because she's kind of with a different person now overnight, right?
Same person. Just as she said, her view was same person, right? Just, you have these new facts, but so what?
Well, what were some of the new facts? I'm sorry. There's so many implications of this. Like, when you talk about your health background, like at a doctor's office.
Yeah, everything that I thought was my, the history of my health And, how were your parents, and did they have this disease or that disease? For 50%, it's accurate. For the other 50%, it wasn't accurate. So that's what drove me to figure out, okay, who was my birth father?
It just makes me think that like a lot of longevity research and mortality research is totally skewed because sometimes the input data is just wrong. You don't know who you are. I mean, like you don't know your genetic background.
You don't know the source. You know your genetic background. You don't know the implications of that with your parent. But you had the DNA still. So in my case, for instance, I grew up. My father was his family came from Scotland, and they were persecuted Catholics who moved by the Brits, who moved to Nova Scotia, Canada, and then came down the coast to New England. And my mother's family came from Ireland.
This is your father, the one who raised you.
The one who raised me.
Okay.
And my mother came from, her family came from Ireland, persecuted by the Brits as well during the potato famine, and they immigrated to the U.S. And so I was always told, you're Scottish and Irish, which is kind of an American thing, right? What's your background? You said, I'm Iranian, right? That's how you identified yourself, right? Not I'm American, right? I'm Iranian.
Yeah, my family's from Iran, yeah.
Yeah, family came from Iran. And so the Scottish part wasn't true. I was raised, Irish Catholic, right? Which is a pretty hardcore religious upbringing. And then I found out that half of my DNA is Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish, and half is Irish. So think about that, being raised Irish Catholic and finding out you're half Jewish in your DNA.
So your kids learned that they're Jewish. How many kids do you have?
2 boys. So they learned that they're quarter Jewish. Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry.
But they're the same people they were before.
Maybe I would cut some of this out later, but I just have to go down some tangents here. So did you ever look up did you ever try to find, how do you find out who your father is?
Yeah. So I did a lot of work on that. And I did it several different ways. My mother always spoke about her days at Polaroid, always kept all her mementos from her days at Polaroid, and she stopped working there after she became pregnant. I was in Singapore working, and she called me, and she said, so-and-so that I used to work for passed away and left me some money in his will. And I was like, oh, that's nice. Wow, that's really amazing. And then after all this happened, I thought about it, and I said, who does that? I mean, what senior executive, who worked with someone in the 60s and leaves her money, right? Who does that? So that sort of, finally I started connecting some dots. And then what I did is I got a whole bunch of books about Polaroid. There's a lot there about the company. It was a pretty amazing company back in the day. It was founded by a guy named Edwin Land, who was the mentor to Steve Jobs. And he's the guy. Steve Jobs was all about finding the intersection of the humanities and science, right? And that's how he thought about the Macintosh computer, for instance, which you may not know what that is.
Of course I know the Macintosh. Okay. Yeah. I was raised on the Apple II GS doing the number crunchers and all that stuff at school.
So you know. So he was all about that. He was really into calligraphy, and that's where all the fonts came from, and all kind of changing the way you think about computing. Well, Ed Land was the one who was doing that in advance of him and sort of mentored him on all that. And he did it through Polaroid, which was, the company that invented instant photography.
And Edward Land came from Kodak?
No, Edwin Land was self-taught, educated, and just... he was an inventor. He had, I think, over 500 patents. He was a big, big inventor, kind of Thomas Edison type inventor, including digital photography, which, everybody takes advantage of today. But they held it back because it would have destroyed their business model back in those days. So I read a lot about Polaroid, learned a lot, and then I also sort of traced the the relatives through that you can do through these DNA companies, right? And so you can look at some of the last names, and from there you can start to figure out on that side of the family who things are. And so I was able to trace back the name of my birth father. And then I did some online research because he was actually pretty well known. And then I got some photos, and that's when I kind of realized that, what had happened. And
did you look like him?
I had photos from his 40s. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was pretty clear. I mean, the DNA, I was related to, people in his family and all of that. So it was very clear. And when I looked at his traits, strong intellect, intellectually curious, a lot of drive, a lot of ambition, had experienced some decent success, adventurous. And so I said, okay, now at least I know where all this came from. Because it didn't come from, the way I grew up, to your point, right? Where did it all come from? That's at least the genetic part of it.
So you know who your genetic father is.
Yes, I never met the man.
He was an executive at Polaroid?
Yeah.
Do you know his name?
Yeah, I'd rather not say it, though.
And you learned this in 2020.
Yeah.
I knew you in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't. I mean, my family was aware, and I told a few people, but it doesn't come up in normal conversation. Since you're asking me about it, I'm sharing.
Yeah, I know, but I can't get off this. I'm sorry. But because you're
sure you don't want to talk about TerraPower?
I do want to talk about TerraPower, and we'll get to TerraPower eventually. I'm sure this has to do with TerraPower, but I would be two different people on 2019 and then 2021. Obviously you probably did all the work. You probably had so many questions, but you did a little bit of it, probably explained so much of who you are. And I'll just play out like a scenario that struck me. You defined yourself as somebody who kind of has a boulder on your shoulder, and when you're told you can't do something, you do it.
Around the company, we call it achieving the impossible, right? When you're told you can't do something, you double down on trying to do it.
Okay, so let's transition into that, but you may not have had that context if your world was different. You may have, if you were raised by, theoretically, there's a world where you're raised by your genetic father.
Could have been,
and he tells you can do everything,
and lots of advantages.
A lot of advantages,
things given to me, and whole different scenario.
Yeah.
That's the sort of the nurture part, right? We're all a function of both, right? It's nurture and nature. It's both.
Which ones for you are the nature side, and which ones for you are the nurture side? Like the nature is,
Well, I think it's the ambition, some of the intellectual curiosity, but the drive to prove that I can do things when people tell me I can't do it, right? You can't go to college. You can't afford it. I figured it out. There's no way you can get into Ivy League school. I figured that out. There's, you're not tough enough to be a ranger. Kind of proved I could do that. Professionally, you're not smart enough to go work at McKinsey. Well, got a good job there, had a good time there, 4 years, did pretty well there.
Mm-hmm.
Joined UTC, and, you don't have the right background to be a general manager here. Went to Asia, made that leap, and ended up being president of Asia Pacific for Carrier Air Conditioning. So I was successful doing that. Throughout my life, it's been telling me things I can't do, and then we go do them.
So,
and that's what we're doing with TerraPower.
Let's get back on track and get to TerraPower. And thank you for sharing that with me. I really appreciate that, and I know that was personal for you.
It's all right.
And if I reacted too intensely,
the shock factor.
Please forgive me. So you were in the ROTC program at Cornell, and you went to the Ranger School.
Yep.
Did you got your MBA
I went back to Cornell after I got off active duty. So I got commissioned, went down to Fort Benning, did my training, went through the Ranger course, lost 40 pounds in the Ranger course. It was unbelievable. It was really intense. Did that, and that was required to go to my first posting, which was a conversion to what was called a rapid reaction brigade or a light infantry brigade in Hawaii, where you would deploy. There's no wars in Hawaii, so you deploy all over the place. Mm-hmm. Went to there and deployed, a couple of times to Korea. That was, same stuff that's going on today with South Korea and North Korea. Deployed to northern Japan. We were in December or February. We were with the special ops group, and we were practicing joint exercises with what's called the ground self-defense force. The Japanese aren't allowed to have an army following World War II, but they can have a self-defense force. And we were practicing repelling the Soviets because if they were going to attack, they would come in, through the north, through Siberia, come over and go into Japan that way. And so we're up in the mountains, on skis, practicing warfare with them. Deployed down to Panama. Back in those days, there was a guy running Panama named Noriega. He was a bad guy. He was, helping move the drug of choice. Today it's fentanyl. Back then the drug of choice was cocaine. And he was believed to be, a major enabler of cocaine coming from Colombia into the United States. We owned the canal back then. It's kind of funny, right? With all this drama around the Panama Canal. Back then we owned the canal. And so we had an airborne brigade in the canal and some Navy guys. And one of the naval officers had gotten picked up and beat up by the Panamanian forces. And so we were sent down as a show of force to sort of send a message to the guy. And we spent 30 days going through the Jungle Operations Training Center. So the Panama jungle is kind of nasty. And
I can't
30
imagine,
days training. And then we came back. And that was sort of the end of my commitment. So I went back to Cornell then and got my MBA and sort of retooled to go start my business career. And during that time, we then invaded Panama and, captured Noriega and put him in prison. So
when you were in school,
when I was in school, yeah.
Did you kind of wish you were in the military, or you're kind of happy you didn't have to go risk that?
Yeah. So when you're training in the military, you're training for the real world. You want to kind of be able at some point to use the skills you're practicing for. Yeah. In my case, in 1989, the wall came down, the Berlin Wall. And so Francis Fukuyama wrote an interesting essay once about the end of history, right? The fall of the Soviet Union was the end of history, which didn't really turn out to be the case, but it was intriguing. Economically, the belief then was that there was going to be a peace dividend, which was code for the military is going to be downsized dramatically. We're going to take that money and put it into the economy. So I didn't really see a future in the military. And so I made the decision to go back and get my MBA. And a bunch of us did at the time. And a lot of the guys I worked with ended up being, very successful business people. A lot of the people I was in the Army with, specifically in my unit in Hawaii. So went ahead and did that. And, rest is history.
When you're throughout your business career, which I want to just double click into some of the phases.
Yeah.
Does military strategy and vernacular show up a lot? Like, we need cover fire over here, or, let's, fire some.
I don't think so. The people I work with think so.
Well, I will. You communicate in military time, so I'll just give you that one.
I do,
That's
yeah.
a layup.
I do that. Yeah, that makes it easier. So you don't have to write an AM or a PM.
Yeah,
it's efficiency.
Yeah, I do have to do math when you do that, though. Right after you got your MBA, what did you? What was your? Do MBAs have a focus, right? Like, what was your focus on the MBA?
Kind of finance and accounting, more analytical stuff. Some analytical marketing as well.
I
spent my summer at Merrill Lynch in New York in investment banking when I was getting my MBA. That was the days when, it was all about investment banking. That's where everyone wanted to be. Private equity didn't even exist at the time.
Yeah.
And did that and decided there's no way I want to do this. right? I was driving a spreadsheet, and I wanted to be a leader of people and building a business and all of that.
I did one of these podcasts with Randy Buller, who's the CEO of Parts Authority, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said he got advice in his youth to go study accounting, but not be an accountant. Yeah. He said accounting is probably the most useful skill you can have in business. And would you kind of concur with that? Or, I mean, would you encourage people to go the accounting and finance route?
So I took, basic, intermediate, and advanced accounting at Cornell, and it has helped me a lot. So I absolutely encourage people to deeply understand accounting. And for those who really love it, if you want to go into accounting, go ahead. And you want to stay in it, go ahead. If not, go do something else afterwards. But it's a great basic skill. But if I had to do it again, I would have majored in psychology. Because, the leadership part, there's all the technical skills in business, but it's really about leadership and your part about inspiring people, motivating people, managing people. But it's all about people, right? And so, determining how to do that and how to be authentic and work with people and the psychology involved in that is absolutely critical. And then obviously when you're negotiating, there's a whole different set of psychological skills that are important in terms of understanding who you're negotiating with. Or in my case, a lot of times I'm negotiating through other people in the company with a customer or with a company we're buying or with a supplier. And it's figuring out how to manage that as well.
I'm so happy you said that, because I walk around just thinking that everything is a psychology problem. Yeah. It's just like, I'm just psychologically forward. And in negotiations, there are always like terms and some objectives and money or whatever it is. At the end of the day, I always feel like I'm solving for an unspoken fear of the other person. Somebody has something that they don't want to happen or they're worried about, or they'll look like, or people will think of them. And so I just push the documents aside and I try to figure that out. And when you solve that, then the rest is like, oh, we're just doing business.
Right.
Yeah. I'm really happy you said that. I
didn't do it to make you happy, but that's sort of, what I believe, what I've learned. All this gray hair.
Thanks for doing it anyways.
I'm glad it made you happy.
Well, now I can walk around and telling people, not just I think that way, but Duncan said so too.
That may or may not help you.
Yeah. So, okay. So, what was your first job after you got your MBA?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask my first job ever, which was a paperboy, cutting grass and paperboy at 7 or 8 years old.
I obviously I want to know about that, but for the sake of time, there's probably more relevant.
I was washing dishes in a restaurant at 14. I wasn't even legally able to. Supposed to be working.
I was filling divots on a golf course when I was like 15 also, and I always like to bring that up with my younger nephews or younger cousins and tell them, like, when I was your age, or
yeah.
But honestly, like the filling divots, I don't. Like if I tried to pull that on my team, like, oh, you don't understand. Like I was on a golf course at 3:00 in the morning. Like, I don't know how effective it would be.
No one cares.
Yeah. So, but more kind of like, I always find the more formative phase of somebody's career is like as soon as you get out of kind of like college, or in your case, it'd be you getting your master's. Like your first real world job. Yours is a little bit different because you were in the military, but like your first corporate job.
Yeah. So I told you I did the thing at Merrill Lynch, right? Which I just didn't like.
Yeah.
So I went back, from my second year of graduate school, and I said, okay, I got to retool. And Procter & Gamble reached out to me and said, we really love ex-military guys. And I was like, marketing, I don't know. And they said, no, it's all about products and customers and brands, and then that's what drives business. If you really want to learn business, you go to Procter & Gamble. It's going to be like getting a PhD. So I went to Cincinnati. Well, first they came up, and I met the interviewer, and he was a guy named Chip Berg. And Chip had been in the military as well, had been in the Army.
You remember the interviewer's name?
Oh, yeah. Chip ended up being the CEO of Levi's.
Oh, okay.
So there's people throughout my career who've just done incredible stuff. So Chip ended up being the CEO of Levi's. He ran Gillette for a while after P&G bought that, integrated that in. And he said, you just got to understand, if you want to learn business, this is where you start. He said, this is what I did. This is where you start, and you're going to learn business. And he was absolutely right. It was a PhD in business. I got the job, moved to Cincinnati. Morgan really didn't like Cincinnati, but she was from Hong Kong, right? So for her, it was
a lot
Midwest
different.
U.S., big change. Yeah. She wanted to go to New York, right? I don't want to go to New York. And so I did that and ended up being the brand manager of Hawaiian Punch, which was losing money. And I really liked the business side of it.
Was this when it was like you want a Hawaiian Punch shore, or was it when they had the big I'm thinking Kool-Aid. No, sorry, go ahead.
No, this was, how'd you like a nice Hawaiian Punch? Yeah, so very violent.
Yeah.
But kind of fun.
I know.
Irreverent.
It was much more violent time back then. Kind of more fun.
I had young kids, right? Yeah. So bringing, tchotchkes home with Hawaiian Punch stuff and letting them drink sugar water. We also had another brand at the time, sister brand called Sunny Delight, which was super popular. It was kicking butt. So it was doing great, making all this money, and we were losing money, and it was a big turnaround. And they're like, okay, we're going to give you the tough assignment. You got to figure out how to turn this thing around. And you have a business team. Your brand people report to you, and the rest are just, you're the hub and the spokes. And that's the model. And, long story short, we ended up making it profitable, turning it around, convincing the company to make some investments in it. And I just learned a ton about business. Worked for a guy named Mike Griffith, who ended up being the number 2 guy at EA, Electronic Arts, which is a gaming company. Mm-hmm. Did really well there. So I just worked with some super talented people. Very fun. And my reward for that was a bigger business, $1 billion business. We would like you to be the brand manager of Charmin toilet paper. I was like,
that's actually a huge promotion.
It was a big promotion. And I was like, okay, so there's really not a lot of marketing to toilet paper. It's a lot about pricing and costs, and P&G was vertically integrated. So they had a factory in Mahoopany, Pennsylvania. You had wood going in, timber going in one side and toilet paper coming out the other side.
Unbelievable.
And I was like, well, I'm not sure I want to do that. And the focus groups are just not going to be that fun, right?
Oh my God.
So I said, okay, I'm not going to get into bathroom humor, but I said, okay. And at the same time, a guy I'd worked with in the Army, a guy named Tony Guzzi, who ended up being is still a very successful CEO, said, we served together. He was a year behind me in Hawaii. We're very close friends. He went to Harvard Business School. I went to Cornell, and then he went to McKinsey. And I said, okay, well, I really don't want to be a consultant.
Can you just for a second step into, the plane, because it was just unavoidable that we're surrounded by them. You wanted to be a pilot. You wanted to be in the Air Force originally.
I wanted to be a pilot, and the Air Force was a way to go to college and then do all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously,
didn't work out.
Your vision wasn't up to the military standard, but so you pursued it anyways. And so now, is it like a hobby for you, or is it, do you integrate it into your business? Like, I know that you fly to our board meetings, but how important is it?
Yeah. So the plane is a tool, right? And it's a time machine for me. I can get from point A to point B very, very efficiently, which then allows me to spend more time on the business. It's not a hobby because you have to maintain proficiency or you'll kill yourself or kill other people. It's super dangerous. But if you do it appropriately, you train appropriately, you maintain your proficiency, you make good, aeronautical decisions, you can do it safely. And that's always my goal. The economics are difficult, right? In terms of, for a hobby, they would be very difficult. So I think about it as just another investment in my company. I'm heavily invested in my company. My wife and I are. And this is just another way of me investing in the company by maintaining the airplane and maintaining my proficiency at my own expense, and then using it to support my role as the CEO of the company. So customers, suppliers, factory. My factories are in a lot of hard to get to places, and I live in a hard to get to place. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah,
that's what it's done for me.
Yeah, so it wasn't, you're taking your kind of gap work year and thinking that you're just going to get a plane and fly around the world. It's more like this is, the next business is I'm going to have this as my tool for.
Yeah, it wasn't that well thought through.
Okay.
It was take the gap year, do something you always wanted to do. My first plane was, it was more like this one over here, this blue and white one, which doesn't give me quite the same flexibility to get everywhere I need to get to, regardless of weather and time and all that stuff. It's not quite as fast, doesn't go as high. So I actually reinvested in the red and white one as a tool. That was a conscious decision. After I became more proficient as a pilot, I then said, okay, now I'm going to really turn this into a tool. And that was in 2020 as well. 2020 was a big year.
Yeah. I mean,
a lot going on.
Yeah. Any one of those things is like a lifetime year for a one person.
Especially your first grandson.
Yeah. I'm not there yet, but I'm not at the plane yet either, I suppose.
I've also inspired others to take gap years, by the way.
Have you?
Yeah, and they've actually...
What's your pitch? Please pitch me.
At the end of their gap year, they've written and thanked me publicly on, LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, those social media. I'm not huge on social media, but they've done that. It was like super cool.
How do you know when they're ready? I feel ready right now for the pitch. So if you can just pitch me on my gap year. Is now my time, or should I just... When do I know it's my time for a gap year?
Yeah, you're probably a little early for your gap year. I know you might feel like it. You're still sort of earning your way there. But it's... after you've achieved, some of the success you want to achieve, but before you start thinking about, seriously about, the next phase of your life, you're better off taking that gap year while you still have your health, and you have, some more things you want to do, and you're able to do them. You go do them. Then you go back to work. And what I find, and what some have found, is they're more energized at work and they want to work longer, right? Because they're not now saying, I can't wait till I retire so I can do X, Y, and Z. They already did it.
You had a taste of the retirement.
Yeah. Tony Huber, a guy I worked with at Procter & Gamble, and then I recruited into McKinsey when I was there, ended up, running PE portfolio companies. His dream was to do an Ironman. And so he took his gap year and trained for and completed an Ironman triathlon, which is a heck of an achievement.
Oh, yeah.
Right? PJ Friedenberg, who was a, Marine recon pilot, hardcore, different wars. Then he was working for one of the tech companies, helping, 3-letter departments of the intelligence community. He quit and ran a fixed base operator, an FBO, and was the chief pilot for helicopters and fixed wing aircraft for a year. Then he went back into the tech stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just like, depends what it is you want to do.
Yeah.
It's super cool. Cause then he might not be able to do that when he retires. Tony probably is not going to be able to go do a triathlon when he's, 65.
That's no small. I trained for an Ironman once, and I just overtrained and collapsed 2 weeks in advance, and I'm happy I did that because I probably would have drowned on the first swim or something. But
Tony finished it. He writes it on his profile.
It's a real achievement.
Ironman completed an Ironman.
It's a real achievement.
It is, yeah. So it's super cool, right?
I imagine a lot of people come to you.
I hope all the people in my company don't tell me they're going to go take a gap year after this. So
I would prepare for that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're going to, but I would just prepare for that.
And if you do it, Bill Hanvey's going to be pretty unhappy with me. So you're not quite ready yet.
I'll say, let's just assume he doesn't watch this, and I'll say it didn't come from you. How's that? So you mentioned McKinsey after Procter and Gamble. Can we step back into your
my career
trajectory
sure.
a bit? So you were thinking about doing.
I wanted to run businesses. Charmin toilet paper was on the table. Tony Guzzi calls me and says, "Hey, you got to try this consulting thing." I said, "You got to be kidding me. I'm a leader of people. I'm going to run businesses. I don't want to be a consultant." He said, "You don't understand what it is. This is different. We're in Pittsburgh. It's a startup office, some really cool people here. A lot of guys like us, all, ex-military, who've gone and get their MBAs and are working here." He was right. And I went up and I met a bunch of them and interviewed and surprisingly got the job. I mean, everyone told me I wasn't smart enough and I didn't have the pedigree. So McKinsey in those days...
So you love that. You love people telling you that's smart.
So McKinsey in those days, you had to have pedigree, which was code for you needed to go to Harvard Business School, right? Cornell didn't make the cut. And so just, having done that and then gotten the job was pretty cool. And so I decided to pursue that. And, it was the right thing to do because I learned about corporate strategy, not just business unit stuff, but corporate strategy and problem solving. And I worked with some really, really smart, successful people. I mean, we started out with 9 people, this little office, nine new consultants starting out. One of them was a guy named Dave McCormick. And Dave had been at West Point. He was a year behind me. He, was in the Gulf War, got a Bronze Star. He was in the 82nd Airborne. I think he was an engineer. And then, had gone through the Ranger course, and he had been like the guy, right? He had gotten the award for the best Ranger and all of this. Got out, went to the Wilson School, got his PhD in international relations, and then joined McKinsey. So think about that, right? No business background at all. And he was just amazing. Amazing leader, amazing problem solver, just rocketed through the place. Ended up leaving, became CEO of a company called Free Markets, which was one of the early or the pioneers in terms of these purchasing platforms that did reverse auctions, right? Mm-hmm. And really took cost out of companies. Sold that off. I forget who he sold it to. Might have been SAP. And then he would join the government. We used to have these debates. We used to have these serious debates about, government versus business, right? And you got all these former military officers, and he and another guy named Chris Dugan, who was a former SEAL, would argue, the problem with the government is, the really good people don't want to go into it. I said, yeah, I don't want anything to do with the government. I want to be private sector. I said, that's the problem, and we got to change that. And Dave actually did it. He went back, and while I was over in Asia with United Technologies, he was undersecretary of the Treasury for International. And then we had the global financial crisis, so he was helping to figure all that out. Left and went and ran a hedge fund called Bridgewater, super successful.
Ray Dalio's fund.
Yeah, super successful, CEO of that, which is like this really distinctive, difficult culture, right? Super successful. Ran for senator for Pennsylvania, lost, ran again and won recently. So now he's a freshman senator. I mean, this guy, I hope this guy runs for president next time around. He is the most qualified candidate I could think of in terms of someone to run the company. And think about it, I started at McKinsey with this guy. Right?
I mean, McKinsey, I know that, so I had experience in consulting. I did 5 years. It's the hardest thing I've done in my professional life. I once a quarter either slept at my desk or just didn't sleep and went the 48 hours. And it builds calluses on it, like psychological calluses in the same way training for an Ironman does, like your endurance for the ability to work. I don't think you do your best work after 40 hours of, no sleep, but I think I can understand that experience there. But there's something unique about consulting firms, and I think particularly McKinsey, about recruiting. You said like you didn't go to business school, but they find amazing talent from all over and learn and have ways of identifying that talent. Have you taken that with you?
Doctors, physicists.
Right.
I mean, we had all sorts of different, former military officers, just a really eclectic group of people, and some seriously successful people after the fact.
Do you, as we get to TerraPower, do you attribute a lot of your kind of career success for, like, how much of it is your experience at McKinsey from a employee's perspective, and how much is it observing the culture of that business and the recruitment side of that business?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, the success we've had at TerraPower is driven by the culture of the company. We can talk about that whenever you want, but it is really what drives everything at the company. In terms of me personally, I've always said a career is a collection of experiences, right? And so any success I've had in my role at TerraPower has come from all the different experiences I've had, whether they're in the military, Procter & Gamble, life experiences, McKinsey, United Technologies, and everything I learned there about business. My first 2 PE portfolio companies, which, didn't go as well as this one. All of those, the good, the bad, all of it provided lessons that have come together today with, what we have at TerraPower.
I need to learn about I know we will talk about TerraPower, but I have to learn about the path there more thoroughly to understand the mistakes and lessons that you learned and the successes. Can you just pick 2 of the most important projects you did at McKinsey that you think gave you kind of a different perspective, or I can think of that from my experience, but so it makes me think about the question for you.
I'll give 2. I'm not going to disclose the client names if that's okay, just because it's sort of their culture. I want to respect their culture, not because I'm trying to be coy about things, because people do that sometimes as well. But so I worked trying to save a major retailer who was competing with Walmart during the late 90s, and they were really struggling. They had a high-low pricing strategy. Walmart came in with this very efficient supply chain, everyday low pricing strategy, all these stores going up everywhere. They weren't the Walmart you see today. They were really just growing at that point. And trying to help them figure out how to compete effectively at a very tactical level. And the reason I talk about this is because, when I work with our retail customers in automotive, all those lessons come back to me. But it's very tactical in terms of how do you lay out a store, right? What are the adjacencies? How do you think about profit per square foot or profit per square inch, if you really want to get micro?
Profit per shelf inch, right?
For vertical and horizontal, right? And how do you lay that out? And how do you do it in a way that the shopper is going to buy more and it's going to be convenient for him or her, and the basket size is going to grow and the profitability is going to grow? All of that was a lot of lessons in that. We ultimately, in the front of the store, and then there was all the supply chain work as well. We ultimately weren't successful, and the company was sort of broken up and then sold off. But a lot of good lessons there. So you sometimes you learn more in your failures than your successes. And it wasn't necessarily because of the work we did. I'm not sure it was a problem that could be solved just because of the momentum and the model that Walmart had developed. And it's certainly endured.
Yeah, there's a whole business school lesson on what Walmart did in itself. So in studying the competition of the client you're helping, I'm sure you learned a ton about what kind of like formidable operations look like.
I'll tell you what I learned about is the value of, thinking about the role of a retailer as just a point in the value chain between raw material and the end consumer, and what your role is, and how do you optimize that all the way through? How do you work? So when I was at P&G, we were just starting to work with Walmart in dedicated customer teams down in Bentonville. Category management was nascent. P&G was at the forefront of that. I was involved in that, and so all of that really taught you how do you work with these big customers in order to grow your business and their business productively, by driving in value and taking out cost, right? Which was a super important set of lessons. And then some of the guys in our industry, it was pretty funny when I got into this industry, I got to know their cultures a little bit. And I said, boy, these seem very similar to Walmart. And then I would ask some of the senior executives, and they would, share some of the history with Sam Walton from some of their founders.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of the lessons they learned and how they applied them at their own companies.
Yeah. I mean, that's just like the story of business history, right? There's some people that just reinvent a model of some sector of the industry, and everything changes from then on, right? Like the history, the way that business was done is no longer. I mean, it's
innovation.
Yeah, it's
All
innovation,
about the innovation.
And then there's consolidation around it. I mean, it becomes sometimes you find a business model that you think of, as you said, you bring the supply chain back down from the raw material to the customer, and you just think of that whole business rather than your role in the supply chain. You think about the entire supply chain, and there are ways that's been solved that make it almost impossible to compete with, right? Really tough, really, really tough.
As I like to tell my eldest son, the computer scientist who's starting his own company, there's lots of different types of innovation, not just ones and zeros. It's not just about software. I know in how you grew up, it's all been about software, and now it's AI, right?
Yeah.
But there's lots of different ways to innovate to win.
But that is really, I mean, there's probably a technology change that sparks a lot of new industry. I think of Uber, right? Uber could not have existed without the iPhone, right? So you get the iPhone or you get the smartphone, you're able to put kind of like the technology at the point of service, to the point of the customer, and have them communicate real time. Never able to do that before. When I was growing up, you had to call for a cab, whatever, like an hour in advance. That was never going to get more efficient, right? Amazon's ability to take retail. I mean, Walmart's mousetrap was unbelievable, but and competitor, like really, really good competitors tried and failed to compete. And then Amazon came in with a completely new tech layer. They said, we're not going to compete head on. We're going to come from a completely different angle, leverage the technology of today. And I often see that's how, major incumbents get derailed, is because they cannot adapt to the technology that is present today. And if you started your business today, would be completely different. It's so hard to take an old business, 100-year-old business, and make it a today business versus starting a today business,
You certainly need fresh thinking, but there is complacency that goes in. And part of it depends on the business model as well, the ownership structure, the incentives, all of that. But there's certainly that complacency, you see it seeping to certain businesses, but it all comes down to culture as well, right? The culture is, customer-focused, winning, healthy paranoia, and ambition, but not psychotically ambitious. It can work for your favor, but if it isn't, you sort of end up being roadkill along the way. And that happens. We see it in our industry.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it in the industry, but I've also seen some of your operations specifically, and without revealing too much of your internal processes, you gave me the opportunity to go to one of your facilities, and I was in awe, but I was also really, really comforted knowing that there is still manufacturing innovation done in some of the businesses in the way that you're doing them. And what I mean by that is BBB, now TerraPower, does remanufacturing, which is now you call sustainable manufacturing. So that in itself is an innovation we'll talk about. But when I was at the facility, I saw auto parts as I expected. I saw heavy duty parts as I expected. But then I saw solar panels. I saw ground up glass. I saw batteries from EVs that are no longer functional. And I saw a team of people who had...
The EVs are no longer functional, not the batteries, I hope.
Exactly. The EVs no longer functional, but the battery may have had a problem with it. But what I saw was a group of people who had a childlike giddiness and joy about creating new things out of, like basically the equivalent of a kid who takes apart a radio and is like, oh, I wonder how this works. Let me see if I can fix it. And I remember asking, I was like, what are you doing with all this ground up glass? They're like, I don't know, but we're going to figure something out. What are you doing with those batteries? And they're like, I don't know, but let me show you what we did. And the invention, the inventive spirit, the invention, the creativity that was going on there, really, really changed my perspective on, it didn't change my perspective. It reaffirmed my perspective that we can still invent in this country. And, your business, when I met you, you defined yourself as, or you introduced yourself as an industrial CEO. You weren't a retailer. I don't run this company. You're like, I'm an industrial CEO. Just that one introduction made me think of you, it gave me the impression that your worldview is more broad, right? Your worldview is
more broad than
a specific industry or a specific
well, it's a segment. Industrial is a
segment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you didn't say you're an automotive CEO.
No, I didn't say I was a tech CEO either, right? It's just, we make stuff.
You make stuff. And some of the things that you're going to make.
remake stuff.
You remake stuff, yeah.
Sustainably make stuff now.
Okay, well, let's just get into it. I wanted to learn a little bit more about some of your projects at McKinsey and some of your private equity experience leading up to this. But I think that the excitement of this conversation is kind of naturally taking us to what's going on with your company today. So if you can, talk a little bit about the company that you joined, maybe why you joined it, and if it is now where you thought it was going to be, or there was no way you could have envisioned this company being where it is because of the nature of invention, that it's just a kind of undefined path.
Okay. It's a lot of questions in there, but let me try. A little bit chronologically and a little bit of, I'll jump around a little bit. So did the gap year, right? Got a call saying, had a bunch of calls coming throughout the year and just sort of put them on the back burner. Got a call in that fourth quarter saying, hey, what'd you think about automotive industry in Alabama? I said, you gotta be kidding me, right? I said, no, we're serious. We think this would be an interesting one for you. I said, well, tell me about the company. Learned a little bit about the company. Said, there's going to be a group of people from the company there, the private equity investors and some of the family members in New York. And would you come down? I was in New Hampshire at the time. Would you come down and meet with them? I said, okay, sure. Went to their offices and spent some time with them and met Don Bigler and met Jeff Bigler and learned a lot about, sort of how both of them thought about business, how they thought about the company, sort of where the company came from, what they thought was needed in the company. And I said, it was pretty interesting. They told me the company was, between Mobile, Alabama and Pensacola, Florida. I said, well, I know nothing about the Deep South. I've lived and worked everywhere. My wife and I at that time had moved 18 times, throughout our marriage, right? And so we've been all over Hawaii, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Singapore, Baltimore, and we've been Chicago, right? And said, okay. So came down and met some of the team, and then was invited to see the operations by Jeff and the private equity guys to see the operations in Reynosa, Mexico. And that's really what got me excited. Because what Jeff had built there was truly distinctive. I've been in manufacturing a long time. And what he had built there in terms of one-piece flow, lean operations, the ability to deal with, in remanufacturing or sustainable manufacturing, every piece of raw material is different. And you've got to start with that. And then the magic is how you transform that into something that's as good as OE or better at a much lower cost point. I said, wow, this is a value proposition I can do something with. And these operations are here. We can do something with this. So love the culture, love the people, love the focus on customers that Don Bigler in particular instilled in the company. Love the excellent operations that Jeff had built and said, wow, I think I can do something. So talked to Morgan. She said, I'm game for another adventure. We'll try Alabama, right? You've gone with me to all these cities. She loves big urban areas. We'll try a more rural area for you. We came down here, and in the first 90 days, I met with the team, and I said, okay, so let's talk about where we want to take the company. And the company at that point had several CEOs. There was a CEO who sold the company to the private equity firm who, left within 90 days. Then there was a search, and it was kind of rough. Then the private equity firm took one of the external directors and made him the CEO, and he was like on site 3 days a week. He got really sick and passed away. Don Bigler, leaned in for a while. Then one of the operating partners was coming over from London and trying to run the company, and the team was just, the lack of consistent leadership was tough. So they just wanted someone, who was committed. So I had moved here. I was committed. And who, shared their enthusiasm to do something exciting with the company. So we got together. So let's talk about what we want to do with it. I said, where do we want to take the company? And we're, normal debate, lots of people talking. And I finally said, well, let's talk about where we want to be in 10 years. 10 years, who knows? And you go through all that drama. I said, well, okay, let's go backwards. Where was the company 10 years ago? Well, they could articulate that very well, right? And here's where it was today. And they said, we're 4 times bigger now than we were 10 years ago. I said, okay. I said, so let's see if we can make it 4 times bigger than we are today 10 years from now. Pause. And they laughed me out of the room, right? They said, you got it. We were small back then.
Never
now
mind. We liked the way the company was going before you got
There's
here.
no way we can do this. I said, okay, well, let's think about it. And, this goes back to, 2 things I've been talking about, right? Tell me something I can't do. And this whole notion of achieving the impossible, right? Tell me a little bit about, Edwin Land. I talked about him from Polaroid. There was a book, a biography written on him that said it was called Insisting on the Impossible. Well, I wasn't insisting on it like Edwin Land, who is one of my heroes, by the way. But I am into achieving what people tell me is impossible. And so, eventually the team came together and said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And we're going to try to, quadruple the size of this company in the next 10 years, see what happens. And then we had a strategy and pieces, and it's evolved over time. We've had a global pandemic, and all sorts of, things happened during that time. We lost, our founder, our really the father of our company, our patriarch, Don Bigler. Jeff retired, and he's now on our board. But the company's, continued to evolve and continued to grow. And it's just been a unbelievably rewarding experience to do that with the people who are here today, as well as the people who aren't here today, who helped, sort of make the company what it is.
I'm really happy we're having this conversation specifically because I learned the phrase insisting on the impossible. I can take that back to work. Yeah. And now I have language around a trait of mine that was not defined, but something that I bring to work. So now I can just say I learned it from Duncan, and there's a phrase. So why did you change the company's name to TerraPower? What does that do for the business?
So was multiple parts of the answer. In when EVs were starting to become the belief was they were going to be a bigger part of the business, and there was a lot of investment going on. We decided that we were going to get into lithium-ion battery sustainable manufacturing, as well as some other components. We also decided we were going to get into solar panel sustainable manufacturing as part of that whole strategy. Our investors at the time was Genstar Capital, and the board asked that we keep that part of the company separate because no one was sure how that was going to evolve. There were all these SPAC deals going on, right. And we said, okay, let's keep our options open. And so we needed to name it something differently. We thought about different names, and then a guy named Tim Roth, who was our head of strategy and M&A, and I were talking about it. I said, we got to do something that kind of talks about sustainability, but also sounds like, is very different from where we are today. And I said, and at the same time, I was going through this, kind of innovation, rejuvenization, because of the whole story I told you about Polaroid and all of that. And so I said, I started throwing out the idea of land, right? And he thought I was talking about Earth, right? And it was kind of a double entendre. It was about the founder of Polaroid, who, by the way, is not my biological father, but the founder of Polaroid, as well as about our sustainable principles, right? And how that drives our value proposition. And so he took it and ran with it and said, we started doing some brainstorming, and then he took it and worked with our in-house attorney, and they came up with some ideas. And somehow between all of us, we ended up with TerraPower as the idea that worked, and, we could trademark and all of that. And so we used it for that division of the company for a while. And then when Clear Lake Capital acquired the company in 2022, we sat down as part of that process and agreed that, the Biglers were moving on, and it was probably time to update the name of the company as well, as we thought about where we wanted to take the company, which was, a even broader vision. And so we agreed on that, and we started a process. It took us 2.5 years. We looked at 600 different names, tested them in lots of different research, and did it all over the world because we operate in lots of countries. And ultimately, TerraPower came out as the winner in terms of the strongest message, most likable, all the different attributes you'd look at. And so we landed on TerraPower and brought all that data to the board. The board, rightfully said, well, you just taken the easy way out because you've been using this name. And we said, no, we looked at all these different options, and this was the best option. And we ended up with TerraPower. And the company it was primarily directed internally to bring all these different companies that we acquired together, bring all these different cultures together. It's worked well there. And it's worked well externally, at least so far. Early innings still. So let me tell you about my other project. In fact, I'm going to tell you about 2 more projects. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Please.
All right. First one is when I first got to McKinsey, I had been working outside the office, with other offices a bit. And they said, why don't you do a project locally here? I said, oh, cool. They said, we are going to work with a bunch of different people around Pittsburgh to develop a growth strategy for Greater Pittsburgh. Remember, Pittsburgh at the time had been coming out of, all the steel mills shutting down, stuff moving to Asia, or moving south, then moving to Asia. And it was a recovering city. It was tough. It was a Rust Belt. And we got together with University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Carnegie Mellon, some of the foundations, CEOs from the big companies, PNC Bank and H.J. Heinz, et cetera. And they all created a steering committee. And there was 4 of us on the team. We broke it up into 2 work streams, economic business development or business attraction and visitor attraction. Because at the same time, there was this controversy going on around convention centers and sports stadiums, which still goes around in cities. And so we broke it up that way. We went and did all of our work, and we came up with a series of recommendations on the business development side, the economic development side, business attraction side, I should say. It was about life sciences and technology. And it was leveraging UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, the capabilities of the University of Pittsburgh, and then Carnegie Mellon tech capabilities as well. And today, Pittsburgh is a vital center of both of those industries. So
didn't Uber launch their autonomous vehicle program in Pittsburgh?
In Pittsburgh.
Through Carnegie Mellon, right?
Google and, Gates put a bunch of money in for Microsoft.
And this is from the work you did with them through McKinsey?
This resulted afterwards. I mean, I was long gone from the firm at that point, but you can see the thread of the recommendations we've had in the development of the city. And a lot, you're a consultant, so you put a book together. You say, here's what we think you ought to do. And then someone else runs with it. But it's, it can be gratifying to see that it actually gets executed. My problem was I always thought I could implement better than the people who I was leaving it with, which is why I eventually left consulting. But it's gratifying to see that. On the other side, on the visitor attraction side, they built the convention center, which has been fantastic, beautiful, right on the river there. And they built a new stadium for the Steelers, which was very, very controversial. But now that whole section of Pittsburgh, they got a baseball stadium, football stadium, convention center. It's just been great for the city. And so we had to show the economic benefits of all of that, which is, pretty hard to prove, right? It's because there's an economic multiplier effect that occurs with those investments, and you've got municipal dollars, and people are saying, why are you putting tax dollars in? Why doesn't the Rooney family do it? And all of that drama. But it's just been so nice to see how Pittsburgh has come back as a city. And I like to think that our 4-man team had a role in that.
That's amazing.
Bringing people together. But we didn't implement, right? It's all the credit goes to all the people who actually did it after us.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And it's been 20, almost 30 years now.
That's true, but you must, and I'm sure you've been to Pittsburgh or kept in touch with it, but
he went back. Sorry? Yeah, my son went to Carnegie Mellon, my eldest one. So yeah.
I mean, so when you go visit, you must see the silhouette of your fingerprints on some parts of the city, right? Like, this was an idea we had. It
was an idea. Yeah. Right? It was words on a page that people actually turned into buildings and businesses and vitality. The government plays a role. Everybody plays a role in having that occur.
That's amazing.
A lot of entrepreneurs.
And you offered up a bonus.
Yeah. So this one is interesting. I was working with a global fruit company, right? And this was during. Do you remember?
I'm guessing in my head. I won't say it out loud.
Do you remember Internet 1.0? Right, Web 1.0.
Yeah.
It would have been late 90s to 2000.
Dial up.
Right, just getting started.
Yep.
And there are all these startup companies. Everyone wanted to figure out how do you take advantage of the internet and what are we going to do. And so this company was struggling. They had, basically. They were a leader in certain fruits, but what they really had was they were a logistics company. They had these great, almost like their own navy, right, that they had invested in, and they really understood logistics. And so they asked us to come in and do some strategy work for them. And I worked with one of the senior executives who was he just thought differently. This is a classic consulting thing where, you think you're telling the client what the answer is. The reality is the client already has an idea and they want you to help them figure it out. And we did that. And their idea, super innovative, was to say, look, fruits have a certain life and they're all part of the cold chain. And so you got to get them to the grocer at a certain point in their life so they can be out there for the end customer. And then the trucks are coming back empty. And the question what they wanted us to do was go and work with all the big grocers in the country using the McKinsey network and figure out if there was an option to create almost a co-op with this company at the center where the fruits were brought in and then there was backhaul across the industry to better utilize the trucking, right? And to use technology to do that. And so my job was to go out and talk to the CEO of literally, all the big grocers in the country, lay out this vision and just gauge their interest in doing something like this. So you had to network into them, you had to have your pitch, you had to lay it out and see what they thought, and then bring it back and figure out if we wanted to do it. Ultimately, it was a fantastic idea, but you could never get everyone to want to collaborate on it.
Yeah,
right?
I know how that goes.
Yeah, and so it didn't work. You couldn't operationalize it, but it really inspired me in terms of just thinking differently and trying to think differently about ways to reinvent companies. And if it doesn't work, you find another way, but don't be afraid to try.
Reinvent companies, but using their own assets.
Using their core capability.
Core capabilities,
Their
right.
core capability wasn't growing fruit. Their core capability was in, very sensitive logistics to get the product in and not have a lot of waste.
Yeah. So now with TerraPower, you've kind of reimagined what the business could do, thinking of, the core capabilities of a business and diversified it into, you've talked about like the electric vehicle future, you've talked about the solar future. Is this
hydraulics, right? Industrial hydraulics. We're in all sorts of stuff now. Yeah.
Are you just at the start, or are you kind of like, is this...
What inning are we in?
Yeah,
it's baseball season's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm always expecting some kind of military analogy, right? Like we're just putting our troops on the beach or something like that.
I don't want to do too much military, but it's as I think about the company going forward, we're about a third of the way there. We're in the third inning. We got a couple of other identified segments of the economy that we want to help realize the power of sustainable manufacturing and what it can do in terms of a strong value proposition for the end customer, and also do some good for civilization as well. And that's important to us. Both are important. And that's really the difference between remanufacturing and sustainable manufacturing, right? It's remanufacturing is a subset of sustainable manufacturing because we're always looking for ways to reduce our emissions footprint and reduce what's going into the waste stream. And we do that not just for the betterment of civilization, but to take cost out of the business. We are passionate about taking cost out of the business. And I'll tell you, I'm probably the least good at it among everyone on the team. I got some people on this team that are great at it, really great at it.
What do you mean? What do you mean taking cost out of the business? It's not like reducing drinks in the refreshment room.
I mean figuring out how to use more of the core, right? The core is the raw material that comes back, the used product. How to use more of that, right? The more of that you use, the less material cost you have. That takes serious innovation to figure out how do you not have to throw something away. So we have these scrap bins in our factories, and I got people who are great at going through those scrap bins and then figuring out how do we reuse this, right? That's the gold.
No kidding.
That's the gold. They're red scrap bins. Go in there, figure out what's in there, and reuse that and bring it back. And it's got to meet the quality standards, right? It's very important. That's one way. The second way is driving labor productivity. Labor rates have gone crazy over the last few years, whatever country you're in. And this is in Europe. We operate in Poland. Labor rates have gone up there, Mexico, US, everywhere they're going up. And it's about how do we use lean principles to reduce the number of people that we need in our processes, and then reuse those people to help us grow, right? The people we don't need, we don't necessarily want to get rid of them. We want to use them over here to help meet additional demand as we continue to grow. Now, if we stop growing, that's going to be fewer jobs for people. So growth is a really important part of our formula as well.
It's interesting that you bring up labor, specifically in this arena that you're in sustainable manufacturing. It is manufacturing at the end of the day. I mean, you're talking about like turning wrenches, banging out, old core parts and reprocessing them and, inventing around them. I said I was inspired by seeing your business, and you have to probably ask then, like, why was I inspired? And, that means that prior to that, I was disheartened. I don't know. I have this sense that American manufacturing is not what it used to be. And maybe that's me just getting older and doing what everyone does and says like, oh, this isn't, they don't make them like they used to. But when I look around at the manufacturers in this country, and I don't mean to be critical, but I think that everyone is living in the same world. And you look at an unbelievable and unprecedented number of recalls from automotive manufacturers. You look at companies like Boeing with their safety risks and a lot of their, the kind of like concerns about the production of their airplanes. You look at...
So let me stop you there.
Sure.
Have you worked in other countries or lived and worked in other countries?
I've not lived or worked in other countries.
So you know the U.S. market. So having lived and worked in other countries, what I like to tell people is the U.S. market is the largest, most competitive market in the world. And if you can compete in this market, you can compete anywhere in the world. Point one. Point two, if you think about the evolution of manufacturing in the U.S., what we do here today is amazing. So you talk about recalls. First of all, the American consumer wants it fast, they want it cheap, and they want it the way they want it. That's why I went to the grocery store. I was traveling this week and I ran out of deodorant. I went to look for deodorant. Do you know how many different types of men's deodorant Old Spice has?
Oh yeah, my decision anxiety is insane.
Correct, because we do it, and because the American consumer wants it.
I think there's even organic deodorant.
If you look at a vehicle, whether it's a vehicle with wings or a vehicle that just has wheels, the complexity in those vehicles is incredible. The number of lines of code, the number of processors is incredible. So yes, there are recalls, but if you think about the average age of a vehicle today, right? 12 years. I mean, the quality has gone up incredibly. So yeah, there are recalls because people are rushing to market to get it to market because you got to be first. It's so competitive. And then you got to figure it out from there. That is not a reflection on American manufacturing. American manufacturing is very, very strong. It's forward. And America is doing a great job of figuring out how to use innovation to compensate for higher labor costs, which a lot of advanced economies have struggled with. You watch what happens with robotics over the coming years.
Sure.
It is incredible.
Mm-hmm. There's an argument to be made that we do a lot more assembly here than actual manufacturing, right? So that...
So you're talking about, it's all manufacturing. You got fabrication and assembly, right? You're saying we don't do as much fabrication. I was in an airplane factory yesterday, right? Yesterday, talking to the CEO of this company, understanding how he's thinking about tariffs. He invited me to walk around the factory. I was down there for some training anyways. So this was my PTO is a day off. And so now you know how I spend my days off, learning about airplanes or walking around factories.
I don't think you have days off is what it sounds like.
And this was a very highly vertically integrated factory, right? I mean, they had chunks of metal, different materials there that they were putting through CNC machines. So CNC machines coming out with components that were then going into the aircraft. And they did everything except for the only thing they bought in was the propeller, the landing gear, and the engine. Everything else was vertically integrated. They were doing themselves. This was serious, serious manufacturing. And this was not a new company, right? So it is very strong here. And we do real fabrication. Real fabrication starts with CNC machines. And there's, I've run companies. My last company, we had probably 300 CNC machines, 300 or 400. I mean, there's a lot all around the world. That's real fabrication. It happens.
Well, I appreciate you letting me, present the challenge and pushing back with such a full, thorough defense of manufacturing. I think you make a lot of really good points.
Cat and John Deere are my customers, right? Serious, great manufacturers.
Yeah.
Just great manufacturers. Some of the process industries I worked in my last company, John Crane, right? Petrochemical facilities, paper mills. I mean, just great processes. That's what gives you the products that you have today. We're very good at it. We're running out of labor. We have a labor problem. We're very good at doing this.
In your defense of manufacturing right there, I just saw your passion. I saw your energy, and I can see how being on your team, that comes out when you're passionate about something the company should do.
Let me convince you why I'm right. That's what you just got. A full-throated Duncan Gillis. I'm going to convince you why I'm right.
Yeah, but that's probably the definition of inspiration, right? It's like if I just 100% disagree with you, I'm just going to disagree with you, but you will have presented your best case. But if you make a good enough case, what you did is you just jostled out of me an opinion that I didn't have, right? And that's probably the most artful leadership skill there is getting someone to think something that they either had an opinion they didn't agree with originally, or they never even thought was a possible opinion that they could have. And so I think you do that. Obviously, it's evidence in the business success. And
I have one piece of evidence. About 2 weeks ago, we had this thing where you have these little Post-it notes and you write something nice on it about somebody in the office. Some of the team had put this together. It was around...
I don't get those.
It was around Valentine's. Someone came up with the idea. I love when people come with these little innovative ideas. So they put them in the break rooms and you write something and you post it on their cube or their office or put it on the bulletin board or wherever. And someone came into my office and I was on some video call or whatever, knocked and I couldn't speak, and they just put it up there on the whiteboard. And I went over to look at it afterwards, and it's still there because it said, "You inspire me, you inspire others." It was just, and they signed it, and I was just like, "Wow, this is why I keep working." Right? It was super cool. That's my only data point that I inspire people, though.
I can tell you that I don't think I've maybe 6 years, 7 years we've known each other, something like that. And sporadic, board meetings, but I totally agree with that. Every time I speak with you, there's some invigoration or inspiration. And I mean this genuinely. I could probably sit here and talk to you for another 4 or 5 hours and take your plane for a spin, have you sit in the passenger seat while I fly it around and talk to you even more. But I do want to be cognizant of your time. I want to thank you so much for spending time.
That'd be an experience with you flying it around. I might have a safety issue.
Take a nap. We'll be fine. I'll get us there. I'll wake you up when we're landing.
Just don't tell my insurance company.
All right.
Or the FAA.
I really appreciate you spending the time with me today. Honestly, I hope that that people listen to this and feel the inspiration and motivation that that I feel just like sitting in front of you. And I know that I've heard from your team and people who've been around you. I really appreciate you spending this time with me, and I can't thank you enough for it.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for coming down to Alabama. Thank you for listening to some of my boring stories. I don't really love talking about myself and telling these stories, but you did a great job of sort of getting me to share more than I might have usually. So well done.
Thank you.
All right.